But let me pick it up. So I am saying that Sunday is a day of Messianic presentation, official offer of himself. Jesus made that happen. The city welcomed him. Why Friday? The answer is Monday and Tuesday, because Jesus, as is his wont, he found a way to drive the people to a decision which would reveal the depth of their seeming commitment. Does that make sense to you? What seemed to be a willingness to submit to him on Sunday, he puts to the test. All right, now very quickly. When I say that, I'm only talking to myself. Keep going here. Tuesday night, something happens. It is unspeakably important. I'm not going to get into it. It's quite simple. Tuesday night, Judas sneaks away to the home of a man named Caiaphas. Now, Caiaphas is the high priest. He is the primary villain in the Passion story. And he's a very, very wicked man, we know both from Bible and extra biblical records, and a man of absolute corruption. But he was determined to put Jesus to death by reason of the fact that he was the high priest. And you know, it says in John 11, referring to Caiaphas, he was the high priest that year. And when you read that, you're saying to yourself, well, that doesn't make any sense. The high priest, that was an office for life. Oh, no, not under Rome. Under Rome, you had to buy it year by year. And he had been high priest for 18 years. And so Caiaphas, now Caiaphas has a priestly villa in the walled city. That's where the priest lives, whoever he is, but he's lived there for years, and his father-in-law before him. So, but he also has a private home. And that private home is on the next large hill to the south of Jerusalem. Never been a part of Jerusalem, big valley in between, but on the hill to the south of Jerusalem, which is to this day referred to, I mean, its official name is the Hill of Evil Counsel. And the reason it's called that is because that's where Judas went to make the bargain. Does that make sense to you? So Judas goes out, it's Tuesday night, and you know something? You got to understand, I mean, just one little wrinkle that I think helps here is that Judas is the only one of the 12 who is a Judean. The others were all Galileans, and so his family was close by. And so you can imagine that he was a student of a rabbi, and so he had attached himself to that rabbi, Jesus, and so he spent most of his time, but he's there in town, and it would not be hard for him to say, whatever, I'm going to go check on the folks. And so Judas sneaks away, as it were, from Bethany on Tuesday night. He goes down to the home of Caiaphas. Now, I want you to see something, and this is most explicit in Matthew 26, because Matthew 26 says explicitly that it was 2 days before the Passover. That's Tuesday night. And notice verse 3. The chief priests, scribes, and elders. Folks, that ought to draw you up short. Chief priests, that's the Sadducees. The scribes, that's the Pharisees. They hate each other. They have found common cause. All right? And the elders of the people assembled at the palace of the high priest. It actually means the villa, the personal home. And they plotted to take Jesus. But this is what I want you to see. Tuesday night, they are saying, not during the feast, lest there be an uproar. So now you know that Jesus dies on the high day of the feast. And yet on Tuesday night, it's explicit here and in Mark as well, on Tuesday night, the Sanhedrinists are throwing their hands in the air and say, we got to be rid of this guy, but not during the feast. And yet he dies on the feast day. How'd that happen? What's the answer? Judas. Because what happens is Judas comes. Now, I'm not going to get into this at all, but in a very interesting and instructive literary strategy, if you don't mind, both Mark and Matthew at this point tell us the story of that feast that happened last Saturday night. John makes it clear that it happened on Saturday night. They tell the story here, not as if it happened on Tuesday, because they make it a flashback, but they tell the story of the anointing and the rebuke, because they want you to understand that it was that innocent, gentle rebuke of the entire crowd on Saturday night that Judas, because of his sin, took so personally. And it had worked in, Satan had used that for 3 or 4 days. And now Judas puts feet to his anger. And he goes down, and what's this? One of the 12, here in verse 14, called Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests, and he said, "What are you to give me?" And they gave him 30 pieces of silver, and from that time he sought opportunity to betray him. So I want you to see that it's on Tuesday night that Judas makes the bargain. Now, there is a lot of confusion, and I'm going to say it's crippling confusion. You've got to disabuse your head of this notion about what Judas was hired to do. He was not hired to identify Jesus. It's crazy to think about, because Jesus had ridden into this. There was no set of human features more familiar to everybody in Jerusalem than the face of Jesus, except for one crowd. One crowd who was very important to the drama that's about to unfold, who would not have been able to recognize Jesus. And who's that? The soldiers. The reason people think the Sanhedrin has hired Judas to identify Jesus is the kiss. The kiss is for the soldiers. That makes sense to you? And Luke is absolutely explicit. I want you to see this. This really colors what's going to happen here. In Luke, he's telling the same story. He doesn't include the, I don't know what I did. Luke 22 and verse 6. He tells us the same story, but he says this. This is the same story, but then it says this. Judas went down. Watch this. So he promised and sought opportunity to betray him to them in the absence of the multitude. That's what he was hired to do, because, again, Jesus was a strategic genius, and he ordered his steps in such a way that he was never without the protection of the crowd, whether at the private residence down there in Bethany or the crowds and so on. And that's what frustrated Jesus' enemies. And they want to kill him, but there's going to be an uproar. Wait, now, 2 things, understand. Number one, the idea is not that Judas is going to follow Jesus around, and if he sees Jesus off by himself, he's going to, text on an iPhone or something. They know the next time Jesus is going to be in the absence of the multitude. That's the Passover. On Thursday night, the Passover has to be taken indoors, and there can't be more than 20 or fewer than 10 worshiping on each lamb or feasting on each lamb. And so Judas knows that the next time Jesus will be in the absence of the multitude will be on Passover night. The only thing is, he has no idea where Passover will be. And that's what Judas is hired to do. I want you to take that with you. Does that make sense? Now, the other thing to say is this, that the fact that Jesus' enemies, once they get sin is always some sort of confluence between desire and opportunity, right? That sin is always happens when you have this wicked confluence of longing and opportunity. And they wanted Jesus dead. But they just couldn't do it. And as soon as the opportunity suggested itself, Judas walks in and says, I can make this happen. They go for it. The fact that they did, in fact, pursue this wicked plot, you got to understand that everybody's career, if not their lives, are at stake. Everybody's. Because if this explodes, listen, Jesus' enemies, both Jewish and Roman, have Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday ringing in their ears. They have every reason to believe that when the city hears that they're moving against this one whom they welcome as king, there's going to be a huge riot. If there's a riot, and a riot of almost unimaginable dimensions, because this city is swollen to several times its normal size, and the Romans are going to have to bring in troops, and heads are going to roll from top to bottom. And yet they go through with it. It's a function of their Satan-generated anger. They are absolutely glow-in-the-dark, purple, angry with Jesus. So angry that they pursue this. But at any rate, now, here's the big issue. You have to understand that given the dynamics that we've just explored and so on, the plan is this, and this is so important, what we're going to talk about in just a moment. The plan is to get Jesus arrested, tried, sentenced, and on his way to execution before the city wakes up. It has to be done under cover of night. Because, again, I'm going to say they got every reason to believe that this city is going to riot on behalf of their savior, their champion. That makes sense? All right, so that's Tuesday night. Now, I'm going to mention two things very quickly. One, and this is a bit of a timeout, and I have no idea. I just cherish the opportunity to be with you. I have the greatest regard for you and your pastoral leadership and all of its parts and so on. But I'm just going to go on the record and say I know that there is a lot of debate as to the specific day on which Jesus was crucified. Was it Thursday? Was it Friday? Are the two big ones? I'm not going to get into it. I will do this. I give you in the notes, I'm going to jump down here. I don't know how else to do it. Could have pulled this up earlier. But as an appendix, I give you a 2-page chart on the various ideas as to did Jesus die on Thursday. Look, I'm going to be very quick here. And this is an intramural, fraternal discussion. There's no question of this guy believes the Bible, that guy doesn't, okay? There's a legitimate issue here. And I'm just going to say, as simply as I know how, every indication in the scriptures, and they're powerful indications in the gospel record, is that Jesus died on Friday. There really would be no question except for what? 3 days and 3 nights. That's the fly in the ointment, and it's a legitimate concern. How can he be 3 days and 3 nights in the tomb? Now, that's Matthew 12:40. Matthew 12:40 is the only time Jesus says, he uses the sign of Jonah elsewhere, but the only time he says, as Jonah was in the belly of the fish for 3 days, so the Son of Man be in the heart of the earth. So, but it's in the Bible. And now I give you a lot of notes on that. But one of the notes that I think is particularly helpful, and it's right at the end, what I try and do is give you the various positions and then the arguments for them. But down at the bottom of the page, the second page, and you don't have to worry about it, but I have this, that there is a very instructive citation from the Jewish literature, the Talmud. This is the Mishnah, and the section of the Talmud. And it is a first century rabbi. Now, it wasn't written down until the 3rd century, but it was a first century rabbi who was remembered to be talking about the 3 days and 3 nights of Jonah's experience. And he says this, and I think it's helpful. He says, this is Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah and so on, and he says this, a day, well, that won't work very well. He says, right here, a day and night are an onah. Now, it just means a unit, a portion. And then he says, the portion of an onah is as the whole of it. So he makes what he is saying is, when we say 3 days, you're thinking 72 hours. It's really impossible to get 72 hours because then you got to go to Wednesday and Jesus rises on Saturday night, and so that doesn't work very well. So, but at any rate, it's a legitimate issue. I've done my homework. I am absolutely convinced. I'm convinced that he died on Friday. This is the standard position. There are those who, out of the 3 days and 3 nights, develop a very careful set of arguments for Thursday. I respect it. That's what I was taught at Central. That's what Gordy Lovick taught me at Central. He had gone to Grace Seminary in Winona, and there was a couple of guys down there who believed in a Thursday. And for the first several years I taught Life of Christ, I taught Thursday. That's not neither here nor there. I'm just saying it's a respected position. I understand it. Everything about our notes here, I'm working with Friday, and I'm doing it with very honestly. I think that's what happened. Now, second thing to say is this, that if you go with as a matter of fact, here, if you go, which I think we should, with a Friday crucifixion and a Sunday triumphal entry, watch this. So I'm going to go back here. Here. All right, well, I don't know how soon I've got it here. The point is that if you go with a Sunday triumphal entry and a Friday crucifixion, Wednesday is a silent day. And there are those who are off-put by that. My blessed teacher, Harold Honer, was off-put by that. But And he actually moved the triumphal entry to Monday. Now everything goes south for me, and it won't work at all. And I did 2 or 3 different papers for him, and we went round and round on this, and neither of us convinced the other. But nonetheless, and I told him, whoever heard of Palm Monday, that's not working for me. How about you? But there may be even more significant arguments on the other hand. But my point is simply this, that I think Wednesday is hugely important. And I give that to you here on the notes. So let me get through Monday and Tuesday. Here are our days, and Wednesday here is a silent day. But here's the thing. It was only late on Tuesday. The Bible is explicit that on Tuesday night they were throwing their hands and saying, can't be done, and yet it's going to happen on Thursday evening. There is a mammoth amount of logistical preparation that has to be made for the plot that unfolds on Thursday night. First of all, a whole cohort, John is explicit, John 18, verse 6. Judas came with a cohort, it's a formal term, and I don't know that it's the entire 600 men, but he had, and it says, he came with a cohort of soldiers with armor, weapons, and lantern. Folks, try and imagine this. I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. But what's going to happen is the Sanhedrinists are going to make the case to Pilate that Jesus is a seditionist. He is a pretender king. He is mounting a rebellion. The Roman soldiers have been schooled. I don't know where they were from. They didn't speak the language, but before they were assigned this particular fortress, before they were given that assignment, they were schooled in what a Jewish rebellion looks like, and it's ugly. The Romans, their working principle was, you rebel against us, and we're going to put it down in hours, maybe days, but probably we're going to bring such overwhelming force, and we don't worry about collateral damage. We celebrate collateral damage. The blood's going to run for months. But the point, that's what the Roman policy was. The one place where they had more rebellions than any other place was in Israel, and it always took them 2 or 3 years to put it down. Because Israel, I like to say, is like one big, those of you who've been there can concur, like one big paintball arcade. You know, I mean, it's just made for guerrilla warfare. And the Jews were champions at it, and the Romans know nothing but overwhelming force, you know. And so my point is that this is serious business. And what happened was some soldier, and again, you don't just knock on the door of the Fortress Antonia. The Fortress Antonia is that huge fort that Herod built on the northwest corner of the temple. But you don't just knock on the door and say, quick, I need 600. There's going to have to be some sort of official mandate that goes out, and the soldiers are going to make themselves ready and so on. And they're going out to arrest a Jewish seditionist and his militia band in their mind. And they're ready, they're on high alert. They are ready for warfare, because that's exactly what, it happens again and again. The last one was in 6 AD. It was a man named Judas from Galilee. It took him 2 years to put it down. And the first thing he did was capture the huge Roman armory up at Sepphoris. Now he's got all the armament and so on. And any parallels come to mind, leave it alone. But the point is, I come back to it. It's going to take work. It's going to take time to get all that soldiery in place. But then they're going to take and try him before the Sanhedrin in the middle of the night. This is a culture where the sun goes down, you go down. These are 70 old guys. They don't get around so well. They live all over the land. You can't get a message from there to here to there any faster than you can get a person from here to there. So you're going to have to get all these men to alert to the fact that you got to gather in the middle of the night in the priestly villa there in the walled city and so on. And then, after they finally get Jesus to acknowledge he is a king, they're going to take him to Pilate at 4:30 in the morning. And Pilate, because they're sensitive, are going to bring his whole judicial apparatus out and park it out on a gate on the western side of the city. So you see what I'm saying? You've got the soldiery, you've got the Sanhedrin, you've got Pilate's judicial apparatus. Yeah, I think you need Wednesday to make this make any sense. I've told you before, folks, honest to goodness, this is a thing with me. This is real history, and it's got to be coherent. You can't just pretend. So I think Wednesday is really valuable. That's my point. So Wednesday's a busy day. Now, I think there's one other thing that happened on Wednesday, and it's hugely important, and that is, this is what I think, but let me go back to this one. I think Jesus probably used this time to arrange for the upper room. Now, I want to go there quickly, but watch this. So I like to think of Thursday. So we've talked about these. Messianic presentation, triumphal entry. Given Sunday, why Friday, Monday, Tuesday, proclamation. Makes the truth concerning himself, demands a decision. Right? Does that make sense? Tuesday night, we got to kill this guy. Can't do it during the feast. Judas shows up. We can do it. Okay, the plot begins to be put in place all day Wednesday. Everything's being ready. Thursday, I like to think of as a day of messianic preparation. And it is twice a day of preparation. First of all, in the upper room, as Jesus prepares his disciples with this teaching, right? And then in Gethsemane, as Jesus prepares his own soul spirit. Now, I'll come to both of those, but let me just go quickly, and I'm going to shortchange this. The place Jesus takes his disciples is a villa. It has a large upper room furnished for a feast. Now, I won't get into it, but this is the western side of Jerusalem. I think we can stand in the airspace. I do a lot of this when we're in Israel. A lot of it's, okay, the building's, been through. It's George Washington's hatchet. You know that story about the guy who saw the sign for George Washington's hatchet. Is this really the hatchet? Oh, yeah, it's the hatchet. It's had 7 new heads and 6 new handles, but it's the same hatchet, So we get over there and we stand in this or that building and we say, okay, it's been destroyed and rebuilt 100 times, but this is the airspace. I think we can stand there. Now, I'm going to take you to John chapter 12, and this is a little bit anachronistic, but it's very important. And I think this is as good a time as any to do it. So let me take you to John chapter 12, and there is a moment, and let me tell you why I'm doing this. Folks, one of the dynamics of the Passion narrative that is absolutely, unmistakably obvious, but is sometimes hard on people. And it's a dynamic, I want to get very serious with you, it's a dynamic that it's bottomlessly important that we embrace it, that we acknowledge it. And that is simply this, that as the cross drew near, it absolutely terrorized Jesus. Now, it wasn't the physical sufferings. We'll talk about that in a little bit. It was the prospect of being made sin for you and me. And we're going to talk about that when we get there tomorrow. But the fact is that Jesus was terrorized by the cross. And I've had people get very upset with me. I was in Siberia, and there was a whole group of student pastors, and it was a situation where I had a very, very poor translator. So they're getting all excited. I have no idea what they want to get up and walk out on me and throw things at me and so on. And I had no idea what was going on, and I finally realized. But they said, you're making Jesus a coward. If you say he was terrorized, you're making him a coward. No, if he had turned back, he'd have been a coward. If he hadn't been terrorized by what he knew was going to be the most unimaginable, awful suffering as the Father disfellowshipped the Son, if he hadn't been terrorized by that, he'd have been insane, you know what I'm saying? And I think it comes through here, because in John chapter 12, this is all I want you to see. It's one of the most noble, and I think this incident ought to really color what we're going to talk about today and then tomorrow morning. And this is on Tuesday of the Passion Week. It's in all that excitement where Jesus is teaching and taking on all comers and so on. And by the way, I should say this. Matthew says specifically that during that day when he is taking on, you remember everybody coming and trying to catch him in his words and so on, Matthew is explicit that he was healing people who came to him. Now that puts a little different spin on it, doesn't it? That here they are. Let me just see if I can find that, because it's going to be Matthew 21. No, it's later than that. Just watch this. This is the cleansing. All right, here it is. They're coming to him, and I hope I can find it. These are the, in my head, I'm not. Look at there, by the way, in the purple. When the chief priests and Pharisees heard his parables, they perceived that he was speaking to them. They sought to lay hands on him. They feared the multitudes again and again. All right, so I'm not finding, if somebody finds that, let me know. But it's explicit, and I'm pretty sure it's in Matthew, but I'm not sure. But I came across it not too long ago, and I thought, well, no, wait a minute, that puts a different spin on things. Here his enemies are trying to catch him in his words, and in between those attempts, somebody comes and he heals the person walks away healed. That seemed to get your attention. Well, at any rate, I lost my way. John chapter 12. So this is Tuesday, and only John tells us this, and some people came and wanted to see Jesus, and Jesus began to speak to them about dying. And notice what he says in verse 23. This is Tuesday. He says, the hour has come that the Son of Man should be glorified. And then he says, most surely I say, unless a grain of wheat falls into the ground, dies, it remains alone. Now, I'm convinced that he is really encouraging his own soul spirit. He's going to go on and make that point to you and me. But the fact is, he's reminding himself. Because as he contemplates this reality, that there has to be death in order for there to be fruit, as you have this strange and kind of stunning verse in verse 27 where it says, now my soul is troubled. And what seems to be happening here is that, I was like saying, it's almost like a Shakespearean soliloquy where Jesus steps to the front of the stage and begins to address the heavens. And I picture Jesus in the midst of this, talking about his death and its time and so on. And I picture him maybe clutching his chest and staggering a bit and say, my soul is troubled. And then he says, what shall I pray? Shall I say, Father, save me from this hour? No, it was for this purpose that I came to this hour. Therefore he prays, Father, glorify your name. Now listen, there is no more noble moment in all the scriptures. For Jesus to face the terror of what he is about to endure and to momentarily consider, should I say, deliver me, and then to back up and say, no, it was for this purpose that I came to this hour. And so now he looks to the heavens and says, Father, you be glorified. I don't know what heartache, what exigency has or might assault your life, but this is the model. This is the prayer. Father, I don't know how I'm going to get through this. All I'm asking is, you be glorified. And listen, this is real. This is a real moment of interaction between the Father and Son. I know that God orders history, but God, and there is that about the way God runs the human universe, just as there is with the moral universe, just as there is with regard to the person about what we can't fully understand. But the fact is that God, this is real. And when Jesus in that moment addresses his Father, his heart is so tender to that of his Son that the Father breaks protocol and speaks out loud. Now, Jesus says, for our sake, because it was so important, but the Father speaks out loud, and he makes this promise. I have glorified it and will glorify it again. Now, folks, that's the promise Jesus is going to take to the cross. He is going to rest in his Father's promise that he is going to be glorified through this. Does that make sense to you? Now, I'm just going to ask you to file that remarkable moment away where Jesus staggers and says, what shall I pray? No, it's for this purpose. Father, glorify your name. And then the Father promised, I will glorify, I will. All right, that's sort of the backdrop, because now I want to go to Thursday, and there are a lot of notes, stuff in the, we won't have time, but let me, let's talk about the upper room. And I asked Mike, Jack. I don't hear anything, you guys. These things help, but Jack, to help me here. And we're going to do a little thing here on the floor. And so stand up and see us if you have to and so on. I just thought it'd be easiest to see us here. But I'm going to get, now here's my point, that when you think of the Last Supper, you got this Da Vinci thing going on, right? And maybe good art, what do I know, but really bad history, okay? 13 guys all on the far side of the table facing the artist, with the big table and chairs and so on. That's not the way it happened. It says that Jesus, number one, Jesus says to Peter and John on Thursday afternoon, go make ready. They say, where? And he says, go into town, you'll find a man carrying a pitcher of water. Now, I know, and you're going to get mad at me just momentarily because I'm a swell guy, but I know that your mind goes right away to omniscience. Now, that doesn't make any sense, really, as part of the story. In other words, the disciples say, Peter and John say, where do you want? And Jesus says, well, I hadn't thought about that, but give me a minute here. I'm getting some. There'll be a man. No. What's that man doing there? I think Jesus set this up. I think one of the things that happened on Wednesday was maybe Jesus went over to Nicodemus. And he said, now, Nicodemus, I need to borrow one of your servants for just a minute. And sure, go over. So he gets over here and he says, there's a woman in town. Her name is Mary. She's the mother of a young man named John Mark. She has a very, very expansive villa. By reason of the protocols of the Passover, she won't be worshiping. She'll be keeping a Passover on another day. And so we can talk about that another time. So I ask her if I can use her upper room. And if it's okay, have her take a man carrying a pitcher of water is genius in its own right. It's the perfect signal because on the one hand, it's very unusual. It's usually women or children. On the other hand, it's not like bizarre. People aren't. It's not like a two-headed chicken. People aren't going to stop and point. But there's probably only going to be one guy there. So what is Jesus doing? He's keeping the place secret from Judas. If Judas had known the place, he'd have had the soldiers there. And there'd have been no upper room. Does that make sense to you? It's so clever. And the other thing to say is, when Jesus gathered with his disciples and he said, you don't know with what desire I have desired to keep this feast. Remember that? And everybody gets very, very, I always say, celebrate the mundane. I think what he is saying is, I moved heaven and earth to make this happen. And because he was desperate to have this time. Now, Jack. Yep. Not only are my ears bad, my mind's not much better. But, all right, now watch, I can do this without hurting myself. Okay, now you're going to get down right here. So, guys, get where you can see us, right here in my position with your back to me. A little closer. Okay, it's easy for you to move than it is. All right, here we are. All right, now, this is a little shtick I do. I did it in the upper room there. But it's just a fast way to work through some of this. Because here is the dynamic. Number one, it says that it was a large upper room furnished for a feast. That part of Jerusalem has been thoroughly dug for reasons I won't go into deeply, but basically because it was totally destroyed in the 6-day war, and so it was open, and it was Arab, and they all fled. And in the digging at that part of the city, they found 3 of these villas, 3 of these expansive villas totally in ruins, and in each one they found what's called a triclinium. And a triclinium was a low 3-sided U-shaped table. And the triclinium was for a feast, and there would be pillows all around the outside. And it would be open on this end. It would be 3-sided. It'd be open behind me in order for the servant. There was no servant. Does that make sense to you? And so this is the position. There'd be pillows, and you would just make yourself comfortable. Because most people were right-handed, the assumption would be that you would be sitting in this fashion, and you could sit Indian style, and I used to be able to do that too. But the point is that this is the picture I want you to have. Now, if you allow it, so you got it. There's a table here. It's low. The food has been prepared. It would be kind of you'd take the meat of the lamb that you were given after it was slain, and you'd make it into a stew or a mash of sorts, and then you'd have bowls of that and individual little bread, and you would rip off a piece and so on. And if you might hand a nice piece to a neighbor. Now, you probably wouldn't get up and go around a table and do it. But, all right, so, and I think it's quite recoverable that there was a certain place where the leader of the feast would sit, and it would be second from the end. So, in other words, if the open end is there, there's one guy here, then I get to be the big, I get to play the primary part. Then Jesus, and who would this be? This is John the Apostle, who describes himself as the one who leaned on Jesus' breast. Now, that's actually a formal title for this position. Who is this? That's Judas. And I am leaning on Judas' breast. That makes sense? It's just the position. He's sitting here. Now, if he wants to speak privately to me, he just leans back. Does that make sense? And that's exactly what happens. So now you take this picture. Number one, notice if you think about the Da Vinci picture, your feet are tucked away. And think about this. It's a horrible faux pas to enter a formal feast room with soiled feet. And this is the latter rains. This is a sloppy time in Jerusalem. And there was a basin. Normally there'd be a basin and a rag and a servant, no servant. And so I think each one of them, as they came in the door, they had to kind of do a gut check and say, well, it's embarrassing to have soiled feet, but I don't want to wash my own feet. I look like a servant. And by the way, this is so important. There is every indication that the disciples themselves were convinced that Jesus was about to establish the kingdom, about to hand out kingdom assignments. And that's why Luke says that there was a dispute that arose over who should be greatest in the kingdom. And that probably had to do with who got to sit closest to Jesus. Because this is what Mary is asking for, that her sons, one on the right and one on the left. It's not a throne. This is the picture. The kingdom is a feast. So the point is, they're scrambling for the chief seats. And so now, so I go back to it. They leave their feet soiled. It's hanging out. So now Jesus gets up, goes and fetches that, does that remarkable. I'd love to talk to you about it. Wonderful, wonderful scene recorded in John 13. But then Jesus comes, and by the way, I like to say, when he gets to Peter, you remember Peter says, no, you're not going to wash my feet. And Jesus says, well, then you have no part with me. Well, then wash my hands and my feet. No, give me a bath. No, you just need me to wash you. And but when Peter says, you're not going to wash my feet, Jesus says this. He says, Peter, what I'm doing you won't understand, but henceforth you will understand. And everybody goes to Acts and how Peter grew and he finally understood. Maybe so. I'm saying again, celebrate the mundane, the story. I think what Jesus is saying is, will you play along? I'm trying to make a point here. I'm going to explain it in a minute, for heaven's sakes, but Peter won't do it, So he finally does sit down and explains it and says, you call me Master and Lord, and so I am. You say, well, for so I am. Now think about this. If I then, your Lord and Master, have washed your feet, I always say, how do you finish that at your house? If I washed your feet, how would we normally say? You ought to wash my feet. That's not what Jesus said. We'd stand in a long line to wash his feet. What he said is, you ought to wash one another's feet. That's a whole different story, you know what I'm saying? But at any rate, hugely important. But now, this is what I want you to see. The supper, they gathered for the Passover, all right? And they kept the Passover. But once the Passover was ended, Jesus made the stunning announcement, the hand of the betrayer is with me at the table. Now, we know where John was. I think we can be certain where Judas was. The only other guy we can kind of position is Peter, and we know he's across the table somewhere. Because when Jesus says the hand of the betrayer is with me at the table, Peter makes motion to John and says, ask who it is. Now, I think probably John asked privately, and Jesus told him privately. Because if everybody at the table knew, how did Judas get out of the room? You know what I'm saying? But I think only John knew. Now, what kind of guy is this John? He's often pictured as kind of the mousy guy. You ever see pictures of the 12 apostles? All of them will have beards except John. And he's always kind of he's the apostle of love and so on. Well, this guy is the son of thunder. And every time we encounter him, he's either trying to call down fire on a Samaritan village, or he's asking his mother to secure him the best place, or he's tattling on this guy who didn't have a union card. Remember that? There's a guy casting out demons, not one of us. And Jesus, for heaven's sake. So this guy is a hard-driving dude. But I think the point is, Jesus is here to hold him down. Because I think what happened is, he says, the one to whom I hand a morsel. Now, interestingly enough, and this colors the story dramatically, when Jesus said, the hand of the betrayer is with me today, and everybody began to say, who could it be? Is it I? Judas leaned over to Jesus and said, Master, is it I? And Jesus says, absolutely it is. Now, whatever surreptitious hopes he might have had, or whatever degree Judas thought he might be sneaking up on, now it's all gone. And he's having a pretty serious struggle there. He's sitting there, am I going to go through with this? He's on to me. But I got these 30 points. And you got to understand, think about Judas, by the way. Jesus had outsmarted him. Judas had made a bargain to tell the Sanhedrinists where Jesus was going to be for this, and he didn't know. And now he makes his way, and he's sitting here thinking, man, I got 600 soldiers waiting. I got the whole Sanhedrin waiting. It can't happen. I got to get out of here somehow. And now he says, is it I? And Jesus says, it is. And then he hands him, John asks who it is, and Jesus hands the sop. Now listen, sin makes you stupid. And that was an act of fraternity. And I think there may have been 8 or 10 guys around the table, because you're all hoping, Jesus had recently told them that they were going to sit on 12 thrones over the 12 tribes. You know what? Some of those tribes are bigger than others. I don't want Gad or Dan, for heaven's sakes. I want Judah or Ephraim, And so I think when Jesus does, and Judas was the only sophisticate in the crowd. He was Galilean. He was the white-collar guy. He kept the bag. All the others were dirt under their fingernail fishermen and so on. And so Judas was well-respected. And now Jesus hands that sop, and I think maybe 7 or 8 guys thought, nuts, I want Judah, there went Ephraim, But that goodness, that kindness, that special act of fraternity, Satan used to anger. This is what sin does to you. It makes you stunningly stupid. And that act of kindness angers Judas, and so he gets up and makes an excuse and leaves. And meanwhile, Jesus around the table begins to teach. That make sense to you? All right, thank you. Now watch, give me a pound. I'm going to ask him to get me off the floor. It may take 2 of you, but thank you. I just got no knees, the knees are gone. But I can still get around Israel, I think. But all right, now, I want you to see something, because this is so timely. In John chapter 13, you have the story. John tells the story of the foot washing, but he doesn't tell much about the upper room. But he does say that he talks about announcing the betrayer and so on. But here, this is the verse I want you to see right here. This is Judas, because Judas had made an excuse, and Jesus said, what you do quickly, and so on. And so having received the morsel, the piece of bread, verse 30, Judas went out immediately, and it was night. Now again, you can't begin the Passover feast until after sundown. So sundown, maybe 7:30ish, it's a long feast. It's not a meal, it's a feast. It includes a meal, it's a feast, teaching, and so on. So it's probably, I don't know, I think it's fair to say it's getting on to 11:30 at night. And Judas leaves in the middle of the night. But this is what I want you to see. So Judas left, and then listen to this. When he had gone out, Jesus said, now the Son of Man is glorified. All right, now listen. He has in mind that promise that the Father gave to him. And what Jesus is saying is, the game is afoot. The curtain is going up. It's happening. Judas, it's interesting that in telling this story, rehearsing this in 1 Corinthians 11, the passage we read with the Lord's Supper month by month, Paul says that on the night when he was betrayed, Jesus took bread. The Greek says this, on the night while he was being betrayed, because Judas has gone to fetch the Sanhedrists. Now, Jesus is going to introduce the Lord's Supper. How I'd love to talk to you about it. It is the symbol of the new covenant. You and I ought to wallow consciously in the blessedness of the new covenant, and we are celebrating that. But at any rate, Jesus begins to preach. Now, John 14 and 15 and 16 are often called the upper room discourse. Not really. John 14 is, because Jesus began, and I'm not going to go through it, but again, suffice it to say, I mentioned before that Thursday is a day of preparation. First of all, he is preparing his disciples by this marvelous, marvelous series of lessons. In John 14, let not your heart be troubled, I go to prepare a place. John 15, I am the vine, you are the branches, you need to abide in me. John 16, it's expedient for you that I go. If I don't come, when I depart, the Comforter will come, and he'll have this ministry of reproving the world and so on. And then in John 17, of course, he's going to pray that magisterial high priestly prayer where your name comes up, the other sheep that are yet to come. So it's a hugely important time. The primary focus is on the coming of the Holy Spirit, which to the Jewish mind is the new covenant, Ezekiel 36. That in the new covenant, I'm going to take your heart of stone, I'm going to give you a heart of flesh, and the Spirit of God will come, and so on. So it's such a blessed, blessed passage, John 14. But watch, I want you to see something. Judas goes, and where is Judas going? And we're going to use this map quite a bit. I know I have it here. And this is in your notes as an appendix, I think. But here you are at the site of the Last Supper. And there's really no question about this. This is that fortress that I mentioned where the legion, not the legion, the cohort. They don't have a legion, but they have a cohort, maybe two. But the soldiers are stationed. The larger base of soldiers down at Caesarea Maritima. That's where the headquarters, the Roman headquarters, is down there on the Mediterranean. But Jerusalem, hugely important city, has its own soldier battalion there. And so Judas is going to have to leave here and make his way all the way up here to fetch the soldiers. Meanwhile, the alert's probably going to go out to the Sanhedrinists as well, who are closer by. Now, here's the point. Jesus is in the upper room. He begins to preach, John 14. But look at this, John 14 and verse 31. So I'm going to just scroll down all of this marvelous interchange and so on. But look at John 14, 31. He says, "Arise, let us go from here." So it's not all in the upper room. He preaches, he teaches John 14, but then he says to the 11, we need to get out of here. Why? Well, again, because he knows how much time it's going to take. He's not trying to escape, but he wants the time. He desperately wants the time to instruct his disciples, and he desperately needs that season of prayer. I'm going to come to it in just a moment. So here's the point. Now, let me ask you this. So Judas goes up here, alerts, I got him, I know where he is, follow me. Where's he going to take him? He's going to take him to the upper room. When he gets there, he's going to find it empty because Jesus has made his way. Now, Jerusalem's a gated city, so you have to find a gate, and the only gate available to him was this gate down here in the south. It's kind of not particularly pleasant, but it's called the Dung, D-U-N-G gate. The reason is because the gates always were named for where they took you. And way down here to the south, at the union of three valleys, was the garbage dump. And that's where he took the dump. But anyway, he's going to go out this gate, then he's going to make his way all the way up the Kidron Valley to this garden. It's a farm. It's an olive pressing farm. And listen, John, who is so carefully supplementing the Gospels, he's filling in details to make the story so coherent. And John says, he tells the story of Jesus. So as he goes, Jesus preaches John 15, John 16. He's going down the side of the Kidron Valley. And then he stops I think probably, and gathers his disciples about him and prays this marvelous prayer of John 17. And now you have in John 18, it says this, when Jesus had spoken these words, he went out with his disciples over the brook Kidron. Now here's a curious thing about the brook Kidron. The brook Kidron, this is I can't change it. This is the Kidron Valley. The temple sits right here. You know, when you think of the temple, you think of like a cathedral. It's a slaughterhouse. Thousands and thousands of animals. Now at Passover, tens of thousands of animals. Lambs have been slain. There were the most careful steps taken to ensure cleanliness, hygiene. And a lot of that, the priests would be doing the slaying, and the Levites, remember the rest of the Levitical family, were hustling about, scooping up anything that could be burned or buried. And they would immediately cart that off down by the Dead Sea to the area called the Jeshimon, and they would do that. They'd burn or bury it. On the other hand, there were these huge, just huge cisterns, and this water system bringing water from Bethlehem 5 miles away, and this massive amounts of water that were stored in these cisterns, and they had these channels and these aqueducts and so on. And then these Levites, that would be just a regular, you'd have donkeys. And those donkeys could carry, 7, 8 goat bags. They'd take goat skins and tie them off and turn them inside out and top. Those were water bags. And so they were just constantly hauling water up there. And then that water was used to be washed everything away. Everything was kept pure through this whole day. Well, and they had all sorts of cisterns. But here's an interesting thing. All of the refuse from the Temple Mount here was dumped into the Kidron Valley. There was a brook there. And that brook, interestingly enough, makes it all the way down about 15 miles and dumps into the Dead Sea. Because you see, the Dead Sea was the divinely provided sewage treatment plant for the temple. because you got that Dead Sea with 10 times the normal concentration of salt, and everything was just totally wiped away. And so on earlier that day, Peter and John had gone to the temple along with tens of thousands of other Jews, and they'd had the lamb slain, and all that blood is going to be. So when it says in John 18 that Jesus stepped across the brook Kidron, I think it's fair to say that brook was running red with the blood of all of those lambs, all of which is a picture of what he's about to endure. And John, but then he says this is the verse I had in mind, verse 2, where there was a garden. And then he says, and Judas, who betrayed him, knew the place, for Jesus often met there. Now, when you get to Jerusalem, everybody goes to Gethsemane. You got to go to Gethsemane. Amen and amen. But what most people don't see, and I think to their disadvantage, they don't see the cave, because part of and you got to leave the garden, you got to go down a lane and down some stairs and so on. But low on the hill, which is the garden, that's where the olive trees were, where Jesus is going to go to pray, there is a cave. It's part of the same. Matter of fact, the olive press is in the cave. The olive press for that farm. And evidently, Jesus, when he was in Jerusalem alone or with others, whoever owned the garden gave him permission. There would have been a stone fence and there would have been thorns and so on, but he gave him permission. So he would often stay in that little cave. And you can go to that cave today and sit there and realize that's where Jesus would often stay. But now again, it's the middle of the night. And these disciples are tired. And so Jesus takes them, walks them across, and what John is saying here is that when Judas got back to the upper room and realized it was empty, the city is crowded beyond what we can imagine. There's only one place where 12 guys, Jesus and the 11, could go. It's where they went regularly. So I think he said, don't worry, guys, and he follows the same route. So Judas now takes the soldiers and the Sanhedrists. Jesus, meanwhile, goes into that cave. He begs his disciples, please watch and pray. This is what he says, my soul is heavy in me unto death. Now, very quickly, what happens, he's going to take 3 of the disciples, and he's going to leave that cave and go up into the garden itself, and there 3 times he's going to beg the Father, if there be any way, let this cup pass from me. Folks, let me just say 2 things. Number 1, I don't think you can really appreciate Golgotha unless you start with Gethsemane. And I'll tell you why. Artists of every age and every medium can very effectively describe physical suffering. How do you describe bottomless spiritual suffering? How do you, and I don't think that the most important element of the story with regard to understanding the depth of Jesus' suffering is Gethsemane. And that's why I like to start with that passage in John 12, where he, for a moment, entertains the idea, what shall I pray? Deliver me? No, it was for this purpose that I came to this hour. It's significant that what Jesus refuses to pray on Tuesday, he prays 3 times with absolute earnestness. And again, he never stops there. He goes on to say, not my will, but thine be done. And having prayed 3 times, if there be any way, and if there's anything this teaches us, there is no other way, but having prayed, if there be any way, let this cup pass from me, you'll remember perhaps that this is what happens. Jesus prays 3 times. Let me just say this. Luke 22 gives us 2 other insights. And I know there's a text critical issue here. I've done my homework. Believe me, this is in the Bible. Number 1, it says that Jesus sweat great drops of blood. You know what? There are a couple of events in Jesus' life which make it clear that he was quite a man. I mean, just physically. Now, you would expect, and I think he was a stone mason. He'd been slugging those big stones around and swinging that 9-pounder, for his whole life and so on. But the fact that he could withstand a 40-day fast, but now the fact that the reality that he could endure the kind of emotional angst that is reflected when this physical situation, this physical condition where your blood is forced into the what do I want to say? Not the blood vessels, but the little ones. But capillaries. I want to say ancillaries. That doesn't make any sense here. But my point is that this is, it's stunning. But the other thing, it says that the Father sent angels. Now, I want you to ponder this. The only other time that the Father looked down and saw his Son at such a physical exigency, so entirely at the edge of his abilities, that he sent angels to care for him, was after a 40-day fast. And I'll insist, I don't think those angels can't do miracles. They would do for Jesus what you and I would do for him. And it took him several weeks, I think. Now, the only other time the disciples are asleep, Jesus is alone, the three have fallen asleep. I don't know what the angels did. I picture maybe that just they bent over and helped him off the ground, and it was with angelic help that Jesus staggered from the garden. But is it not instructive, folks, that now it's not by reason of a 40-day fast that the Father did. It's by reason of Jesus' contemplation of what he's about to endure for you and for me. So I'm saying that this season where Jesus understanding what's about to happen begs the Father. Now, it's so blessed that after Jesus, he goes and wakes the three, then he goes and fetches the other 8, and he would have made his way, and you can stand, it's a bustling place today, cars and cabs and hawkers and so on, but you can stand exactly at the place, because there's no real question as to where Gethsemane was, and just walk down the hill, and that's where Jesus was arrested. So now, Jesus comes down with the 11, and they look up to the north, to the south, and here comes, and they see this cohort. It's called a multitude. Judas has a multitude of soldiers, and they're fully armed. They're in rank, and they're files, and they've got armors and weapons and lanterns, and this is a pretty imposing sight. And you're one of the disciples. What's going on here? And then you recognize, wait, Judas is with them. What's that all about? And then you see all these famous saying here, what's going on here? They had no idea. Folks, I'm convinced that they were confident that Jesus was about to establish the kingdom. And they were confused by all of this talk about going away and so on. But not. So at any rate, Jesus is arrested there in the Kidron Valley. And I want to talk about one other thing. Let me see here. So Jesus is arrested and deserted by his disciples. Now, I want you to catch something here that is almost always overlooked. And you know what? I'm going to confess something to you. When I say that, and it's a sweet providence of God, I graduated from Central. I proved my absolute inefficacy as a pastor for about a year and a half. It was pretty frustrating. And I was invited to join the faculty at Pillsboro. I thought I'd died and gone to heaven, for heaven's sakes. They were going to pay me $3,500 for a year. But that's another story. It was great. One of those things you wouldn't trade for $1 million. You wouldn't do it again for the same, you know. But the point is that the second semester I was there, the chairman of the Bible department, I'm just right out of seminary, and he said, next semester you're going to teach Life of Christ. I never read a book on Life of Christ. I knew nothing about it. I was totally intimidated, but I'm thankful for it. And I've taught, now I'd like to find the first 7 or 8 years and give them their money back. I'll tell you that right now. But the point is that I've taught, and by the way, that Bible chair department was Larry Pettigrew, who is, was my dean in Cary, North Carolina for all these years. But my point is this, that I look back and there are elements of the story that I missed for so long. And one of those elements that really is staggering and very important that is the drama of this arrest, because these soldiers, I before, are on high alert. They've been told there is a Jewish sedition afoot and there is a pretender king. And they know exactly what that looks like. He's always going to gather around himself a militia, and it's going to be ugly. Does that make sense to you? So now they come out, they're on the alert, and Jesus had prayed on his way down the hill. A part of that prayer, he had said, I have kept those you've given me, protect them. And now Jesus, what happens is this. They come down, they're on high alert. Jesus steps forward and says, who is it that you are seeking? Well, in the melee, first of all, Peter, and I never finished this thought, by the way, having prayed 3 times, let this cup pass from me, when Peter takes that little dagger, listen, Every family had a little family dagger you'd use only once a year to slay the Passover lamb. And because Peter and John were given this responsibility, they brought it along. You remember in the upper room, they said, we got these two swords. So it's a little kind of ceremonial dagger. It's very sharp because it has to be very humane. So he draws that out and whips and cuts off the ear of one of the high priest's servants. And Jesus, it's interesting the way John tells the story. Jesus says, hold it, wait a minute. Don't get, because you can imagine they're about to slaughter the Roman soldiers. And he touches that man's ear, takes his hand away, fully restored. Now, I always say, to me, that's the second most amazing thing that happened that night. The most amazing thing being that the rest of the soldiers went on the arrest. You know, I'm guys, you take it from here. I'm going home. You know what I'm saying? But nonetheless, the point is that Jesus steps forward and he says, "Who is it you are looking for?" And maybe the leader of the battalion or whatever takes out and reads it, and there's an official, the Jesus of Nazareth, Yeshua ben Yosef of Nazareth. And Jesus says, "I am he. Don't worry about these guys. Let them go." Jesus takes careful steps. And it's interesting that John says, and I know you're going to be disappointed in me here, but John says that when Jesus did that, the Roman soldiers fell back over themselves. And there are a lot of kind of, I don't know, you know, like one idea is that Jesus, when he said, "I am he," some burst of theophanic glory, you know, exploded from his person or something. I don't think that's in the narrative, you know what I'm saying? I think the point is that those Roman soldiers, they were ready to attack. And they figured they were just about to break into it. And when Jesus said, "I'm here," they all, okay. I think it's kind of the Keystone Cops make an arrest, you know what I'm saying? They all kind of stumble over each other. I think that's all that's at stake. But the point is that the disciples desert Jesus, and Jesus is, in fact, arrested. By now, it's got to be close to midnight. And so I have here, I'm going to do this very quickly in order to make it work for tomorrow. Jesus is going to be taken, first of all, all right, let me do this very quickly. I'm shifting gears. We're going to Friday. And I've always referred to, and in your notes, I refer to Friday as a day of Messianic perfection. I have in mind the cross. And Jesus had said back there in Luke 13, "I'm going to walk today and tomorrow, and on the third day I'll be perfected." And what he's talking about is it is finished. On the other hand, first of all, it's a day of Messianic prosecution. And there is a series of hearings and trials that I want to spend some time with. And I'll just summarize it this way. First of all, there are 3 Jewish hearings. Now, I'm a little careful, not all the time, but they really shouldn't be called trials. A trial is where the court gathers to determine guilt or innocence and to assign punishment. This is an attempt to come up with an indictment. I have told you before that Jesus, all throughout his ministry, made the claim to be Messiah, God come in the flesh. Remember we talked about that last night? That was his twofold claim. On the other hand, it is so instructive that Jesus, because he was wise as a serpent, and because he knew that if he openly laid claim, if he used the term Messiah of himself, Messiah means a lot of things. I could trace the history of the title for you, but above all, to the Jewish mind, it means king. And Rome will not stand for kings. And so this is why, as I say, when they came to him and said on Tuesday and said, the Sadducees, "What right do you have to take over and he didn't say, "Well, I'm Messiah." He said, he took him to the John argument. Remember that? The John the Baptist argument. And sure enough, he was always so careful. And he never, ever uses the word Messiah of himself in his public ministry. There's one time early on, now during the trials and so on, yes, but there's only one time when he does. And he doesn't say it explicitly, but it's the woman at the well. And she says, "I know that the Jews believe Messiah," and he says the one talking to is he. Other than that, he never takes the title Messiah. On the other hand, how does he claim to be Messiah? He's clever. And so what he does is he takes to himself all of these Old Testament pictures and words and so on that every Jew will understand is Messiah, but will be innocuous. In other words, they won't be able to use it to accuse him to the Romans. Does that make sense to you? It's exactly what's going on. It's a huge dynamic. What is Jesus' favorite title for himself in the Gospels? What is it? Son of man. 81 times. Where's that come from? Daniel 7. 4 beasts, the Ancient of Days takes his throne and calls one like unto the son of man, and that son of man is dispatched to be the Messiah, to establish a fifth world kingdom. Now my point is, when Jesus claims to be the Son of Man, when he uses the title of himself, every Jewish person understands that he is saying, I am your Messiah. I am the fulfillment of Daniel 7. On the other hand, if the Jewish leaders go to Pilate and say, you got trouble, this man claims to be the Son of Man, what's he going to say? Me too, aren't we all? What are you talking about, So I'm telling you, it's genius. And everybody acknowledges there's a huge wicked heresy built on this, but the fact that Jesus doesn't claim to be Messiah. He does claim to be Messiah, but he doesn't use the term. Well, that's what has the Sanhedrin is tied in knots, because they have sent their agents to Pilate's agents. They have this huge thing cooked up. They're going to meet Pilate about 4:30 in the morning, but they don't have a credible indictment. Nobody can make the case that Jesus publicly claimed to be Messiah. Does that make sense to you? That's exactly what's got them tied in knots. Now, two things. Number one, this section of Jesus' life is as much attacked as any other, because and we're told, there is this community of scholars, lost, called critical scholars, and what I mean by that is anti-supernaturalistic. They absolutely reject the possibility of the supernatural, so they have to explain the Bible away in all of its parts, and they love to find contradictions. And guess what? The Gospels are their happy hunting grounds, because you got 4 guys telling the same story. Now, there are no mistakes. There are no inconsistencies. Every one of them can be easily explained and so on, but they love it, and they'll tell us that the one area of Jesus' life, which is absolutely, you can't sort it out, it's a mess, they contradict, is the trials. They fit perfectly. But what you have to understand, no one gospel tells us all of the stories. John, there are 3 stages. I'm not going to walk you through them very quickly. 3 stages to the Jewish hearings. The first is recorded only in John, and it was Jesus is being taken to Caiaphas. He's the high priest and thus in charge of the Sanhedrin. But it's going to take a little time, and there in that massive priestly villa, there high on the western hill, there's an old man named Annas, who was the father-in-law of Caiaphas and used to be the high priest and have his own quarters, so he went in on the action. So while they're making everything ready, Jesus is brought to Annas. And this is where Annas says, tell me about your teaching. And Jesus said, look, what's going to happen in this hearing is that the Jewish leadership is going to high-handedly violate any number of their own very sacred, very precious, very noble protocols of jurisprudence. They're going to break their own laws again and again. It's an embarrassment. I think we need to talk about it honestly but carefully, but it is a function of their anger. And the first and most important, perhaps, canon of jurisprudence, of criminal, no culture can rise above the integrity of its judicial system. If that doesn't put, get you to shaking just a little, I don't know what, and the judicial system of the Jews is right out of the Old Testament, right out of the theocracy. The first principle was, in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses shall every matter be established. In other words, the reason we have a Fifth Amendment is because of that reality. You can't interrogate the witness. And so when Anna says to Jesus, tell me about yourself, Jesus says, I always spoke in the marketplaces and the synagogues, ask the people. He's always saying is live by your own standards. Well, there is a security guard, a soldier assigned to Annas and so on because of his status. And he slaps Jesus. Now another absolute unbreakable protocol of Jewish law is that you can't punish a man until he's proven he's done the crime. And so Jesus says to the man, if I've done wrong, testify, but if not, why would you strike me? Now again, there's nothing of, I think Jesus just being very honest. He's pointing out to Annas, he's not living, well, nothing comes of that, because now they're ready, and Jesus is taken in, and this is the big one. Now you have and this is in Matthew and Mark, and you have the 70, or most of the 70, they're gathered. It's illegal. It's in the middle of the night. You cannot have a trial between sundown and sunup. That's important, because you can't get witnesses. And so they bring all these witnesses, these false witnesses. They can't. By the way, another protocol of Jewish law is in a capital case, if two purported witnesses disagree, the man is immediately released. But none of that's honored, of course. And so they contradict one another. I won't go through it. But the point is that finally Caiaphas, the high priest, who knows he's got a date with Pilate at about 4:30 in the morning, because this has to get done before the city wakes up. So Caiaphas comes up with a strategy. I don't think he had much hope that it would work, but he's desperate. And so he does, in fact, put Jesus under oath. And he says, all he's trying to do, he can't find anybody who can testify. I heard the Nazarene say he is the Messiah. So he says to Jesus, he puts him under oath, and he says, tell us, are you the Christ, the Son of the living God? All right, now I want to ask you two questions. Of those two claims, to be Christ, the Messiah, to be God come in the flesh, which of those two is most intrinsically offensive to a thinking Jewish mind? What is the most horrific? Son of God, right? That's blasphemy. But of those two, which is what they're after right now? See the point? This is not, they want to hear him say he's Messiah. And so, but they know that his claims are, he called Christ, the Son of the living God. So he says, all right, I'm going to put you under oath. This is what you've said again and again. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. You know, but tell us plainly, are you the Christ? And Jesus says, I am. It is exactly as you said. He thinks we got him. So now we got him. And we've got 70 guys who heard him claim to be Messiah. We can go and make the case that he is, in fact, a pretender king, a seditionist. He's a threat to Rome. Now, on the other hand, what they did was in the middle of the night. And Pilate, they know, is not happy to be part of this. And he might just throw the whole thing out because the whole judicial process was entirely wicked, wrong by their own standards. So they decide that they're going to keep Jesus for a time until the first blush of dawn. The law was you can't have a trial between sundown and sunup. And so they're going to wait until the very first, and I don't mean the sky begins to grow pink. I mean a little gray on the horizon. And they're going to wait for that. And then they'll bring Jesus back in and get him once again to confess the same thing, and now they can take him to Pilate. Does that make sense to you? Only Luke tells this story. Both Matthew and Mark refer to it, but Luke tells the story. And that's exactly what happens. They keep him, and for a time, the soldiers who keep him are making sport with him and buffeting him and blindfolding him and so on. So now, at the first blush of dawn, and that's why I say about 4:30, I've sat up on the roof in a hotel at this season of the year and just waited. You know what else happens, by the way, at the first blush of dawn? I don't mean the pink, I mean just the gray. The roosters start to crow. Now, Jesus is going to be brought back in. No witnesses, nothing. They just say, are you the Christ? Jesus says, I'm not going to answer that. He wants the okay, are you the Christ, the Son of the living God? I am. Now he's taken to Pilate. Does that make sense to you? 3 Jewish hearings. First of all, Annas, just trying to get something out of him, and Jesus says, play by your own rules. The big one, no witnesses, finally, tell us plainly, I am. We got you. Put him in hold for a time. Now, one other thing, just to take home with you. It is stunning how much ink Peter gets in this drama, and it's all unhappy ink. But the story is told in great detail, and one of the guys who tells it in the greatest detail is Mark, and that's only Peter. Mark is just writing down what Peter said, so he tells his own story. But Jesus had told him 3 times, you're going to deny me. And now Peter has found his way into the courtyard. He's already twice denied Jesus. And now it's so interesting to put it all together, because if you understand the dynamics and so on, Jesus has been taken off and held in that outbuilding somewhere, maybe a cistern or something. He's being held and abused because they're waiting for the first blush of dawn. Now, as that first blush of dawn approaches, he's brought back, and what else happens at the first blush of dawn? So Peter is warming his hands, and for the 3rd time he takes an oath, and before the words are done from his mouth, it says that the rooster began to crow. And it's not a rooster. That's not the point. Some people say, the point is the time when the rooster crows, the very first morning of and so here's a rooster right there in that courtyard, and he begins to crow, and it says this, Peter remembered the words of the Lord. That's stunning. Those words were only a few hours ago, and he had twice denied Jesus. And somehow his mind, it's stunning. By the way, Peter's going to write an epistle in which he says, I'm writing this epistle to stir up your minds by way of remembrance. Matter of fact, he says, I am writing to, and I'm going to make sure that even though you know, Peter understood that we have a capacity to forget. And so Jesus, anybody. But at any rate, and then the Bible says, Luke says that as he heard the rooster crow, he looked, and Jesus turned and looked at him. How'd they happen to be there? See, Jesus is being hauled back in for that immediately post-dawn full hearing to get him to once again. Meanwhile, Peter is warming his hands and denies. So it really fits together just perfectly. Jesus then is going to be taken to Pilate, and you'll have the Roman trials. Now, this is an awkward place, but we're going to break it here, and we'll pick it up tomorrow morning in Sunday school. I know there will be people, we have to do a little review, but you're the elect, you know what I'm saying? You really understand what's going on. So, but again, it's Friday, and as I say, I just finished with this, that it is going to be, and this is what we're going to talk about in the morning service tomorrow, a day of Messianic perfection on the cross. But there's, first of all, this drama of the trials, the prosecution, and 3 Jewish, and then the trial before Pilate. We'll pick it up there in the morning.